I knew going in, I was not there to change Microsoft. I was there to just be an advisor and help Microsoft. And there's going to be times where if I was trying to fix and change everything, I would get frustrated. And so, but we took honestly inspiration from Outlook itself. Like Outlook on Windows was like the pinnacle of email apps. Like it is the monster email app. When you think of using email in a corporate world, like email, calendar, and contacts is really one thing. It was one of the rare cases in collaboration where having the three together in a single app actually made the experience better.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Kevin Henrikson with us. Kevin is a San Francisco-based entrepreneur and angel investor. He's known for his email collaboration and Web3 software work. Previously, he co-founded Acompli, which became Outlook Mobile. Yes, it got acquired by Microsoft. That's pretty impressive. He currently leads Dust Labs. His recent projects have included DeGods and Utes, innovative digital art collections with associated online communities. Kevin, it's so great to have you on the show.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
So we've known each other for a very long time. I think we might have met in 2010 or something like that, maybe at the at DK's think tank.
DK's think tank down in San Diego, right? Or
Yeah.
somewhere in the Southern California.
Yep. Long time ago. 13 years. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, obviously each of us have kind of like had various paths across the years. And so cool to reconnect and yeah, excited to chat today.
Yeah. So let's talk about, first of all, your origin story a bit, because I mean, that's kind of a dream to get acquired by Microsoft for a lot of folks. That's not how you started. So what were your humble beginnings, and how did that all evolve?
Yeah, born and raised in California, in the Bay Area. So, born in Oakland, grew up on a pig farm in Central California, really small town, and went to LA for college at UCLA. And as growing up, I always just loved tinkering on building things. So, my mom always used to joke I'd spend, a week working on a go-kart or a motorcycle to spend 10 minutes to go ride it and break it, and then spend another week fixing it. And so I just enjoyed the process of like breaking things, taking them apart, sometimes getting them put back together.
Mhm. By the
And I
way,
put
I love that too, and I did that as a kid and teenager and young adult. I remember scrounging a satellite system from parts that I got for free, just following an FAQ that I found on Usenet. This was before the web.
yeah, so
Yeah,
good.
crazy stuff. And buying a car for $65, and then finding an alternator to replace the broken one at a junkyard, and like yeah, crazy stuff.
Yeah, totally. Reupholstered my car, painted it, built truck beds, like just really fun, cool projects that, sort of had that tinker in me. And a high school auto shop teacher was like, "You should be a mechanical engineer." And I was like, "What's that?" He's like, "Well, that's like what happens when you're really good at math and you want to build stuff." And I was like, "Okay." So I applied for college, checked the mechanical engineering box, got into UCLA, and started down that path. And at home, I had like dial-up internet, like the old school modem here, like the connector thing that, a lot of the young folks listening probably won't remember. But got to UCLA, plugged in Ethernet for my first time, and I was like, "Whoa, this is cool." And that was when I like got hooked on the internet. And at that point, I was basically like convinced I was going to play with computers more. And the engineering thing, while I finished my degree as a mechanical engineer, the one thing that hit me is like I talked to this guy that worked at Boeing, and he's like, "Yeah, in our career, we usually work on one, maybe two projects, right?
Mhm.
Like over a 40-year career." He's like, "On a car company, maybe you work on like 4 or 5, right? Every 10 years, you kind of get put on a new platform." And I was like, "Man, this internet thing, I've been building little websites, and I'm like, every 5 minutes, I'm making new creations. I type something, I save it, it changes." And for me, like that sort of difference of like, well, I don't want to work on 4 things. I want to work on like, 40,000 things. Right. And that was where the internet really clicked for me. And so, yeah, took what I thought was an internship. I applied off Craigslist. They actually sent me a full-time offer for between my junior and senior year at a software company here in LA. And I was like, "Okay, I'll just take it." And so I worked all summer. And then at the end of the summer, I was like, "Hey, I got to go back to school." And I was managing, I'd been promoted. I was managing the web team at that point. And they were like, what do you mean you got to go back to school? It's like, well, I just was applying as an intern, you must have convinced and thought I hired it full time. And so I ended up doing like a part-time schedule. I'd go to, work 3 days a week. And I'd go to school 2 days a week because it was like my senior year. I only had a couple classes left. And that sort of was it. And then that company went out of business, as they do in 99 when lots of companies folded. It was like a resume processing business that didn't work. Moved to the Bay Area and the end of 99, 2000, and been San Francisco based essentially for the last 20 years, building a lot of email companies. And so starting with like carrier class emails, so like emails for like big telecom providers internationally. And then, the one you mentioned in the intro to the show, Acompli, co-founded that with a couple friends. And after 18 months, so we raised about $7 million building an email app, basically, building what we thought was going to be just a great email app for your phone for people that honestly had two things, a Gmail account and a work account with Exchange. Because what we saw is that there was great apps being built for Gmail, but like people that had to go to work and work on a Microsoft Exchange, which was the most of the world, like the business world at that time, right? This is like 2013. And even now, I mean, Microsoft is still in like traditional workforce outside of like Silicon Valley startups and small things. Like Microsoft Exchange is the dominance. And we were like, wait, what if we built an app that was really cool that we wanted to use that combined our personal and email account in a delightful way? And that was the idea. 18 months later, Microsoft acquired us for 200 million. And then 6 weeks after that, they just sent us the logo file. Yeah, thanks. And they sent us the logo file and said, can you rename the app to Outlook? And we're like, whoa, we thought we were like joining the team, going to get to work on the cool stuff at Microsoft. And they were like, no, we just want that app shipped as Microsoft Outlook on iPhone and Android. And so that's what we did. And then spent about 3 years. The first day we had 3 million users, and then several 100 million users per month, monthly active users by the time I left 3 years later.
Wow, that's quite an impressive feat. Well, congratulations on all that. And did you stay for those 3 years because you had the golden handcuffs, the earnout, or did you stay because you just loved the project and the team at Microsoft? And yeah,
it was a common. I mean, it's a cash deal, so there was like we got paid the day that we started. So like it wasn't like there was. I mean, we had incentives to continue like as employment. Like they would give you like a really good job offer. We were at a startup. We weren't making that much money, so getting a standard offer at our level at Microsoft was a big pay raise. And then they have stock incentives. But I think the thing you said that was really important is that like while the three founders obviously got a very big windfall the day the deal closed, I had worked with the same team for most of the last 10 or 15 years. And so it was really important for us to like deeply integrate the team. And a previous acquisition that I was part of when Zimbra got acquired by Yahoo, which was another email company, I'd been doing email for a while. We took a different approach, and I was younger, the team was younger, and we're like, hey, we're the startup guys. And my mental thing was like, hey, we're here to fix all your problems. We're the smart guys you bought. And, sort of this cocky attitude rolling into Yahoo, and ended up not working out. Like we ended up migrating Yahoo Calendar over to our technology, but ended up into a pretty big political war with the Yahoo Mail team. And so much so that like when Carol Bartz joined, this is like super dating myself, to become the CEO, she's like, wait, we've got this business that's running that's not actually integrated. Why don't we just sell that? So we literally sold the whole business a second time to VMware. But that experience and the sort of organ rejection that the organization that acquired us felt, and we felt, like while it was cool to kind of hunker down and we would joke like we were the 300, we'd all throw our shields up, and like when the corporate overlords would come at us, we'd all hunker down in our cubes and hide. It wasn't as like a cool story to talk about. It's not like our technology is it's literally used by 0 people, right? They've migrated off of it and those kind of things. So when we got the acquisition with Microsoft, that was deeply in our mind of like, we want this to be the most successful thing. And it's something that I tell a lot of people that get acquired, because they get acquired and they're like, oh, they're hiring me because I'm so smart and I'm going to go and change this large company. And really the mindset should be that no, they're hiring you as a highly, highly paid advisor to help their larger company be successful. And that could be that people be more successful, to learn from you. So I spent the first 6 months at Microsoft literally traveling around to offices, doing almost like inspirational speaker stuff, talking about startups, talking about being agile. What is it like to work on a 14-person team that built something arguably that the 500 people at Microsoft had not been able to build, right? That were working on mail at that time, and really understanding like, how do we think about user-centric design? How do you think of product market fit? That kind of stuff. And so that was a big mindset shift where, I knew going in, I was not there to change Microsoft. I was there to just be an advisor and help Microsoft. And there's going to be times where if I was trying to fix and change everything, I would get frustrated. And so, but again, had to learn that the hard way from the previous acquisitions that I went through.
But how perfect was all that? I mean, it's like a divine setup to have that organ rejection situation with Yahoo, so that you could learn all those mistakes in a lower stakes environment, and then utilize all that to maximize the value for you and for your co-founders and team, and all the users around the world who use Outlook mobile. That's
Yeah,
really...
I mean, still today, it's delightful to get on a plane or be in an airport or be walking around and see somebody on their phone over their shoulder using Microsoft Outlook. And I'm like, man, that tab row was the same way that we said it, to 8 years ago or whatever, when we first was laying this thing out on a whiteboard. Pretty cool to see. And there's still people on the team that have still stayed at Microsoft, that are promoted, that are running much bigger jobs, that, again, because we didn't have this organ rejection environment, and sort of, we represented a more advisor sort of positive experience. The rest of the team acted that way too. And, it was just vastly more successful outcome. And it's funny because we acquired several other companies during that time at Microsoft when I was there in this same space, lots of little mobile apps. And a lot of them were deeply unsuccessful because it was the first time that founder had sold a company. And even with me telling him, hey, you're an advisor, take off your, company A hat and put on your Microsoft hat, change your email address, like go all in on like, you're the Microsoft's biggest fanboy or fangirl. It's hard to, like, as a first time founder, it's hard to see that as the right thing. You're like, no, I'm so passionate about my baby and I've built this thing. And I've seen this now in a lot of my angel investing, that when you get acquired for an add-on type technology, you have to go with this like advisor sort of helper mindset, and not with this like, I'm here to like fix you mindset, because that's generally not what these organizations are buying you for. Even if they tell you that during the deal, like, oh, we don't want to change anything, we just want to run this as a separate business. They say that to like make you feel good about the acquisition, but honestly, they just want their company to grow faster and learn from you. And if they would present it that way, and the founders were prepared to receive it, yeah, to your point, like this, there's nothing that can replace that experience of me sort of living the hard way firsthand. But I wish I could teach that lesson to every founder out there that's thinking about selling, or just about to sell, in terms of how to integrate and how to be a good partner to your acquirer.
Well, you're doing a little bit of that right now for those who are founders thinking of exiting at some point and listening to this very podcast.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So when you were going around for those first 6 months, evangelizing to different Microsoft offices, divisions, about user-centric design, product market fit, what were some of the key points, some of the key, takeaways for the audiences that you would go speak to?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one was speed and like the amount of time between releases. And so if you think of Microsoft that I grew up with or knew in my early days of being in the internet, was they would ship like a new version every 3 years. And then they were really proud and they got to like 1 year. And so when we got to Microsoft, most of the mobile apps were shipping like 4 to 6 weeks. And we were religiously shipping every Friday as a startup. And so we would ship every Friday. And like, honestly, like some Fridays would have very little in them. And then we would test from Friday at 6 p.m. until Monday morning. We would have a team that worked over the weekend. It was remote, that did testing over the weekend. And that simple thing, that the train's going to run every Friday, you're going to do a release, you're really good at releasing, you're never worried about like, oh, there's like many, many weeks of untested code that we're going to have to drop on the users. It was like small bites. And that sort of like mechanic, and snapping to that mechanic, fixes so many things, right? It allows you to take small incremental steps, get feedback along the way because you're actually shipping to real users. But it also creates a really good internal environment around. You may have a very senior engineer that's very confident in their change. They can ship a large change 5 minutes before 6 p.m. on Friday. Where you may have a more junior engineer that may want to ship something and leave it in there for a week or two in the testing branch before they integrate it into the main branch, and they want to integrate it on Monday, so they have a full week of sort of like watching that land. And of course, people sort of learn the hard way of whether they're on the like, I'm senior and I can ship late, or I'm junior and I can ship early. But that sort of notion of like being able to really guide when changes come in has an incredible trickle down effect of how of the quality of the code just gets way better, because you're never like, oh, I've got this really unstable thing that Microsoft traditionally would say, hey, we work for 5 or 6 weeks and then we spend like 3 or 4 weeks stabilizing. And so the actual time between code getting written and code getting to the users was like sometimes 8, 9, 10 weeks. Even this is their fast, like mobile mode, right? Like this is like an app code. And I'm like, that just doesn't work. Like in our case, like we never have more than literally 4 days or 5 days of unreleased code. And that small amount of unreleased code changed it. And so then that's like, I think the mechanic. The second one is treating support as a gift. And so having like literally a support button in the app that makes it incredibly easy to like essentially talk to the team, and getting that feedback directly into the team. And so we would, even today, if you go into Outlook, you can go into settings, help, and you can literally file a ticket. It grabs all the context of what you've been doing. You tell it a problem, and then there's a really good automated system that captures that feedback that's reviewed by a team that's essentially in the engineering team. It's not like, hey, there's this support team somewhere else. Like we send all those support tickets into engineering so that they can feel like when things are going wrong, they get really quick feedback. And so those two things, while that's not like when people say, oh, it's user-centric design, or it's, very product friendly, like they think of the marketing version of that. And really what you want is you want like your engineers sort of feeling the pain, or also feeling that direct raw feedback from users, and also making it easier, right, to give feedback. Because if you just assume that that's the support team's problem, the support team will build scar tissue around how to protect like feedback from getting to engineering, that by the time it does get to engineering, it's late and it's been deeply like watered down. And so for me, it was like, you want to remove all that, so that if like you're getting hundreds of support tickets, like, well, we probably should look at it. Those are hundreds of users that are calling you. And I always joke, like, there's very few things in life where you call support and you don't care. Like I could be mad and I want a refund or I want something, but generally the reason you're calling support is because you want them to fix it so you can continue to use the product and keep using it, like, and keep doing it, right? If you actually don't care and you're like, I never ever want to use this app again, you'll just call your credit card company, do a chargeback, and then just block it, right? Like if I didn't want to use Uber again, I would just charge back my last Uber ride and say they're terrible, and then just delete the app. But so if you're going through the support experience, you're actually trying to like make them better. And a lot of people don't think of it that way. And I think that sort of was the other one. So those are kind of the two big things, is like ship really frequently and provide a really high signal and direct connection into the people building the product with the people using it.
Yeah. Yeah, because your users are invested in the platform if they're taking the time to submit a support request.
100%.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you would see people using your app, and 8 years later, they'd still be the nav functionality and stuff would still carry over year after year, and that all started from just a whiteboard when you were in startup mode. How did you bake in user-centric design with just you guys as developers and startup founders just kind of riffing in a conference room or serviced office space or something with a whiteboard and capture what users really needed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we were users. Like I am a heavy email user. I am an inbox zero. Like I'm very, tight in terms of keeping my email needy. And then like my other co-founders were not, like inbox gajillion, lots of unread, sort of a more sparse approach. And so we were
Yeah.
honestly users. But we took honestly inspiration from Outlook itself. Like Outlook on Windows was like the pinnacle of email apps. Like it is the monster email app. And when you think of using email in a corporate world, like email, calendar, and contacts is really one thing. And we actually fundamentally believed that the way Apple, the operating system had designed it, and Android, by separating this into this app thing, it was one of the rare cases in collaboration where having the three together in a single app actually made the experience better. Like I don't think of like managing my contacts as a Rolodex on my desk and then like a calendar with a paper calendar and then like my inbox as messages, right? Like that is a very old desktop way of thinking. It's just better together. And I think what's funny is we've seen that now with like in China with WeChat and some of these other kind of super apps where they've really combined, or Grab is a great example in Southeast Asia, where they've really combined a lot of functionality into a single app because it actually just works better together. Like maybe I want to get food. I'm on the way home from my airport. I want to make an order in Uber Eats. Like you're starting to see that. And so for us, again, we were 15 years ahead of that trend. But it was honestly just first principles thinking around, let's put them together. And then we took inspiration from literally Outlook itself, because that's what people had used on the desktop for 20 years, because there was an email, a calendar, and a contacts tab. Now they had journal and notes and some features that people never used. We didn't add those. We talked about it. But that was the sort of first move. And then literally released it, as Reid Hoffman would say, when we were quite embarrassed that the beta barely worked, but started just getting feedback. And people were like, oh, I like this, I don't like this. And some people are like, oh, I wish you could move this, or I wish you could hide the tabs when this particular view was open. And that stuff started to build into it. And so it took a pretty collaborative approach of editing. But the initial move was literally just first principles thinking of like, man, these things should be in one app.
How did you know that journal and notes should not go into your app?
I just didn't use them. I mean, honestly, like we didn't use them. And it was like that. And when we got to Microsoft, it was funny that there was like this lore of like, yeah, they're like, man, less than 1% of our users use this. Now, they would be very angry if we deleted it, but it was like that also that like, we used to joke, it's like the trash raft of features, right? Because Outlook from the original version was very much designed by IT. Because if you think about it, Outlook was not sold to an end user. It was sold to an IT department that implemented Exchange and Outlook for their company. And it wasn't actually sold to end users. And so this notion of like, wait, we're selling a consumer product to the end user. They're using it or choosing us, right? Because now in the old generation, you got to a company and they just gave you the software to use. But now you join most jobs or companies, or I have a phone, like I'm self-managing whether I use this note-taking app or this journaling app or this email app. We have a lot more choice. And I think that notion of choice hadn't been impressed on Microsoft as deeply in the org as it should have been when we got there. And so, yeah, so for us, it literally was like, we don't use journal, we don't use notes. Like, we don't need that. Let's not add that. And even our contacts app and calendar app, when we first added it, was incredibly bare bones, because we're like, let's just add the minimum thing to get this out. We're shipping every Friday. And so I think for literally months, we didn't have like recurring meetings. You couldn't edit a recurring meeting. You could only just do it single instance meetings. We didn't have delegation. I don't think we ever added tasks when I was there. It was a number one requested feature was to add tasks, but same thing, like we didn't really use them. And we're like, oh, there's lots of other task apps for that. But I'd have to go look now, honestly, to see if Outlook's added it. Cause I know it was like something we deeply debated, because obviously Microsoft Exchange has it in the back end.
So I'm curious what you use personally for tasks management, for journaling, and for note taking.
Yeah, totally. So I use Asana for tasks. I've used it for years. I just really like their mobile app. It's really simple. It has some lightweight delegation. For journaling, I use an app called Day One. It syncs to Map,
I use that one
Mac,
too. Yeah, that's a good
and
one.
iPhone. I can put pictures in there. I have like an insane streak of like 3,000 days or something. I've been like, pretty consistently ripping on Day One for a long time. I actually migrated away from a different platform that I'm going to forget the name of, but it was like literally they would send me an email that said, what did you do today? And I would just reply to the email. And that was the way that I journaled for like 6 or 8 years. It was a very like Web 1 type product, but I found the company finally shut down because it wasn't really a company. And I figured out a way to export that into a CSV file and get that implemented into Day One. And so I switched to Day One probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But now it's great because I can throw in pictures. It's not just text. It's like, has this really cool calendar and location view. Like it's, yeah, kind of cool to think back, and I'll, jump on a day and it's like, what did you do on this day 8, 9, 10 years ago? Which is like fascinating, right? My daughter's like 1 year old or something. Like really, really cool memories that pop up looking back.
Yeah, that's fun. That's really cool.
I think the other thing just to add to that is like back to the like thinking smarter as an entrepreneur. It's incredible the things that I was stressed about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, like arguing over the about page of a company that completely failed or went out of business. Like, um, it just was like mind blowing to me. Like when you're in the like thick of things, how worried and you get, obsessed over the details. And it's something that I try to impress on like my co-founders that are a lot younger. They're all in their 20s today at my current company. And that I'm like, man, like we're really passionate about this thing, but I can assure you a year from now, probably even 6 months from now, and definitely 5 years from now, we're going to be like, why did we worry about this? Like, it's not actually going to be that big of a deal. And so, just trying to take, things that really get crazy in business or product like a little more lightheartedly, because the market's going to move, things are going to change, companies are going to change, people are going to change. So keep a positive view, because the number of very frustrating journal entries that are in my journal from 6, 8, 10 years ago when we were building Acompli or building other companies, that today I kind of giggle about. I'm like, man, that's funny, we never shipped that feature, or that thing we ended up deleting from the app and it was a terrible idea. Like, being more willing to just be humble and like, it's going to work itself out surprisingly well.
And conversely, what would be the opposite of that, where you really should have taken it much more seriously, but you didn't?
I think relationships, right? And I think that both personally, but also in business, like when you do a business deal with a vendor or a person, like really understanding who the humans are, or even just hiring co-founders, like, hiring employees. I think while the business piece of it or the technology piece or the product piece, those can really drift in different ways. I think humans are very, very complex beings. And I think really understanding the humans and your own motivation and understanding yourself of what you really want out of a relationship, whether that's business or personal, I think can't underscore how important that is to just have those critical conversations up front. When you start to feel uncomfortable, like this isn't working, like don't harbor those bad thoughts. Like just say it. Like go out and be like, man, I'm frustrated, or this really rubbed me the wrong way, or I really think we should do something else. Because a lot of like the deep regret and anger comes from like harboring these sort of thoughts, where like if you probably would have mentioned it up front, 9 times out of 10, the other person's like, okay, cool, I'll just do the other thing. And then the 1 time out of 10 they don't, you can have that conversation and really get to an understanding when the stakes are a lot lower.
Good advice. And the old expression that people don't remember what you told them, but they remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
Can you think of a specific?
Yeah, just it's understanding the feelings, right? It's just how do emotions, how do feelings work, and how does that track?
Yeah. Can you think of and share with us an experience, an exchange that you had with somebody who maybe at the time wasn't even that important to you, but became very important, and you would have rather have had that advice early on about people remembering how you made them feel? I'm just curious if like there's some sort of scenario that played out where somebody said something, or you reacted, or you could have said something and you didn't, and it kind of changed the course of your business, your work life, career, your personal life.
Yeah, I think I have two answers to that. I mean, one is I think compliments in the positive is deeply underrated. I think a lot of times I definitely find myself in like asking for more, pushing for more, you know, finding the thing that's wrong and focusing on that, and not saying like, wow, you did the whole compliment sandwich thing of like, holy shit, you did an amazing job on these 9 things, but here's the one thing I want you to fix. I personally default to the one thing you fix. And I think a lot of that's just the way I was grown up. My dad in particular was very like hammering down on the things that were wrong, and very infrequently commented on things that were positive. Um, and it's funny because I received that as like a very positive, motivating thing of like, man, I have one more thing to go focus on. But I think general human psyche is not that way. And that for me, like remembering to like start with like, what are the things you appreciate? What are the things that you compliment on is a deeply underused skill that I've had. So I think that is like start with a compliment, find positives before you sort of go into critiquing.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I
can
think
personally, I can be very critical. I can come off of very critical because I'm so focused on getting it perfect. And I sweat the details. I see the details. I just like, I can zoom into the typo when everything else on the page was fine. But that typo just like, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, no, and then what happens is you obsess over the feedback on that and forget to be like, wow, this is an incredible work, thanks, you got it done, it's good, here's some improvements. And I think that person, it just creates a very um less positive sort of environment to sort of be around. And again, not with no malintent.
Yeah.
I think the other one to me that is more of a specific scenario is there's been multiple times that doing a vendor deal or doing like a sales deal where you're deep in a negotiation, like I'll cross the line and push too hard, right? Where you're like probably get more aggressive or more sort of hard lined on a specific issue. And this is the whole win the battle, lose the war, where you're like, oh, this comes back around 5 years from now. That person's in another environment. And now I'm on the other side of that negotiation. Or worse, people are like, oh, you can't do deals with this type of person because XYZ happened, and it sort of prevents you from winning deals. So I do think that, like, again, it's something that I have to work on and always like remind myself of, like, you know, how do you make every exchange a good one and positive one, even if there's something hard at stake, whether it's a negotiation or critical feedback. And I think that's helped me a lot. Like I've had to like fire, lay off hundreds of people over the last 25 years. And I think, I don't know if I'm getting better at it, but I think I'm more understanding and emotionally able to like walk through the why and help people understand, because it's like, and I've had people now be like, wow, that was like a cool conversation. We actually enjoyed our 1 hour conversation, yet I was firing you. And, try to really give like, what are the positives? What didn't work? Why didn't work? What's the parts on me? What's the parts on the company? What's the parts on the individual? Where I think earlier in my career, I was nervous to be that vulnerable, and I felt more like a robot. Like I must fire you. I must say these like particular words that HR said and not be very human, which came off very cold, but also just left deep scars, I think, on both myself and the other people involved.
Hmm. Is there somebody you can think of? You don't have to mention the person's name, but is there somebody you can think of that, like, yeah, I really wish I would have fired or laid off that person in a different way? It feels like maybe there's some, I don't know, karmic debt there or unresolved emotional scar, trauma, whatever, that maybe you could reach back out to the person years later and try and heal that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think there is in some cases, and in some cases I have. Like we've reconnected. Like the software in Silicon Valley is a pretty small world. In a lot of cases, I have reconnected with people that have been, where it didn't work out, and honestly, a year or two passes, and you're still connected on LinkedIn. You still see them. They're in another job, um, and it you sort of like kind of make up, and you're like, hey, I'm sorry for this or that. And I think I would say more of them have been like just passive reconnections than like actively going and seeking ones, where there was something that didn't work out well.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's so important to clean up messes, even if it's been decades. Took a long time, but I finally reached out to a key executive from my previous company that I'd sold, and we got into a power struggle. He insisted on coming all the way from New Zealand to the U.S., and that's an expensive trip on the company's dime. And we were in a real pickle cash flow wise at that time. And I told him no. And I'm the founder, and he insisted he's going to come anyways, whether I like it or not, whether I authorize it or not. He's coming anyways to this board meeting. And instead of, you know, virtually beaming in. And I decided to just start a process to take him out of his role because of that. And yeah, there are times when you can be on the surface right, but it's not the merciful thing to do. And it's either be in judgment or be in mercy. Can't do both at the same time. It's a binary thing. It's a toggle, and I was definitely in judgment mode. And yeah, so I left a deep scar with this person, and then many years later, finally reached out, apologized, and yeah, hopefully that was taken on board with the sincerity and love that I sent it with. You know, I did get a reply back that thank you for that, but it's just over like a LinkedIn message exchange. It wasn't over a phone call or anything. So I just think that cleaning up your messes, even if you were in the right, is really important, because I believe business is a spiritual game.
Totally. Yeah. And it's a long game, very long game.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about Web 1 and how you used an app that you just emailed it back every day. Uh, I'd love to talk about the evolution of Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, and also how that kind of mirrors with or tracks with the evolution of marketing over time.
Yeah, I think, when I grew up, there was no internet or no web, right? And I think that, was transformational. So Web 1 for me was like the first sort of early versions of bulletin boards and dial up, and then, sort of websites. Web 2, I was there. I presented at the first Web 2 conference, demoed our app as a, email app on the web. And then now, sort of participating in Web 3, I've found myself sort of attracted to those transitions just because there's a lot of ambiguity and there's a lot of things that haven't been figured out. And so to me, that's fun. And I see that as like this deeply enjoyable curiosity and optimism of like, wow, this could change everything type of approach. And I think if we think back over the last 20 years, kind of 0 to 1 to 2, and then now like we're in the very early innings of Web 3. um, I've seen those sort of like always start with marketing, right? In the sense that like the first piece of like websites were used for marketing, like before they turned into business tools, right? And then they turned into business tools. And then some of the cool, fancy Web 2 techniques, sort of transitioned again into marketing lead forms and things like that. And then they went into business tools, right? And I think mobile, we saw the same thing, right? A lot of people built mobile apps to help market their products before the mobile app became the product. Um, and I think in Web3, we're seeing a lot of brands, sort of take Web3 with that same first step of like, oh, this could be a cool way to reach new users, to reach a new audience, to just expose ourselves to a new brand. And I think we'll start to see over the next, let's say, 5 years, that transition into more like applications and more native use cases that become businesses themselves that aren't specifically focused on marketing.
Mm-hmm. So what inspired you to get into Web3? Because that's a core focus for you now. And actually, before you talk about that, can you define for our listener what the heck is Web3? What makes it so different and exciting and future focused?
Yeah, totally. So I always think of Web 1 as like basic internet web pages, like being on the internet as Web 1. I think of Web 2 as like sort of this deeply interactive sort of application sort of experience. And for me, that is still centralized, right? Where Web 2, it's running on servers. There, are big players like Google, Facebook, et cetera, that are running like large amounts of the data, the user. Like when I log into Web 2, I'm logging in with a Gmail account, a Facebook account, a Snap account, a Twitter account, or X now. Where Web3 started with like the roots in crypto and blockchain. And the idea there is it's like hyper decentralized. So one of the ideas, if you read like the original Bitcoin white paper, which again, from a technology point of view, got me excited, years ago when I read it, of like, wow, this is pretty cool. It's like programmable money. Like this is kind of a cool way to program. And now extensions of that are around blockchain, where identity and users and like ownership, everything's permissionless. It's like I own my identity. It's like this cryptographic key, and whether that's a coin, a token, or some interaction, um, those us participating in this sort of like new internet or this new Web3, there's the central actors don't have all the control. Like there are companies obviously all over the place, but like a lot of the blockchain technology is hyper decentralized. Like no one owns Bitcoin, like the infrastructure for Bitcoin. People own Bitcoin and pieces of it, but it's really supported by that audience. And it's somewhat akin to like open source in the Web 2 or sort of previous technology world, where like nobody owns the Apache web server or nobody owns the React code. It's like, yeah, there's a foundation around it, but a lot of contributors sort of support it. And if any one of those were to fail, or many of them, the project would more than likely still go on. And I think Web3 has a lot of that ethos behind it, where the infrastructure that's running the early versions of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and these kind of like core blockchain technologies are highly distributed, where many parts of it could fail and could go on. For example, China banned Bitcoin mining a year or so ago, and like at the time, a huge percentage of Bitcoin mining was in China. And what you saw is, with these miners get shut down, they moved to the US, they moved to other countries, and it kind of survived essentially a country banning it. Where when China banned the internet, or versions of companies, there's still companies that today do not run in China because China's banned them. But Bitcoin still runs in China. Like if you're in China and you have the right thing, you can actually get to it. So I think Web3 is really this
Yeah.
notion of decentralization, permissionless, and sort of having that control come back to the user rather than to the central corporation that runs the servers or companies.
Yeah, I think for the end consumer, they need to care about this, because as censorship spreads beyond countries like China, and you have monolithic companies with the power to deplatform or demonetize your channel, like you have rights, and your rights are being violated if you're not speaking to in the right way to a particular narrative that's the approved narrative. You can get censored, and that is not possible, or is a lot less likely, if you're on a decentralized platform where there's no monolithic mega corporation in cahoots with a particular government or entity that behind the scenes is pulling the strings.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would add, like, there was a good speech at like Permissionless, actually is the name of the conference in Austin, by Eric Voorhees. And he talked about like when you use your credit card or you use Venmo or you use Apple Pay, you're actually getting permission from like hundreds of different actors. It happens very quickly, right? Your bank, different kinds of agencies and governments and things. And so when everything going right, you don't even notice that you're getting all these permissions. But then the
Yeah.
instant like something goes wrong, you have a suspected fraud or something, like those permissions can get taken away and they can lock up your money or lock up your transactions. And I think there is this sort of financial censorship that, you know, again, for the average day, the average human, you never notice it, but the potential for that to happen is larger. And to your point, if somebody decides that, hey, what you're doing or your platform is not interesting, you could financially be disconnected from the system. And the idea of Web3 is to really like democratize that and say, hey, it's really open and permissionless and decentralized, where you don't have to like have agency to one particular narrative or to another. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah. Funny coincidence here. I'm wearing a permissionless T-shirt from the conference last year.
Let's
Check this
go.
out.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Oh, nice.
Trustless,
Look at that. Look at that. Very
leaderless,
cool.
bankless, permissionless. All that. Yeah.
You're on that thing. Yep, I love it.
Yeah. We've all drank the Kool-Aid. Yeah. That's awesome. Now, from a marketing perspective, something I see a lot of Web3 companies doing is making basic marketing mistakes that you don't see on Web 2.0 websites and just on the traditional internet. So there's this kind of common theme for Web3 companies and projects where they'll have spinning things on the homepage. They'll use opaque language that doesn't make sense to anybody who's not on the inside. Uh, Things kind of moving around on the page, distracting the user. Uh, Poor button verbiage and calls to action and headlines and yeah, just a lot of stuff that just feels like we're starting all over again with maybe 15 years ago kind of web marketing tactics that didn't work right, and somehow they didn't get the memo. And so I worked in collaboration with a friend of mine who owns a design agency called Studio One, and my friend is Greg Merrilees, who is also a past guest on this show, and we created a website called Worst of Web 3, worstofweb3.com. And yeah, it's just like if somebody doesn't know what the heck your project is about, and you're throwing around acronyms like TVL and stuff like total value locked, and like what the heck does that mean? It's like nobody's going to click on something to see what it is. If it's not clear what it is, they're not going to click on it and load a whole new page or a modal box or something. So anyways, just fun little project to have a look at if you're curious, is worstofweb3.com.
I like it. No, it's very true. And I think a lot of this stems from crypto and Web3 kind of growing up so internet native that like, but social media native. Like, I mean, honestly, like most of crypto and Web3 lives on Twitter or in message boards. And so it's funny because people talk about mass adoption and training. And I think even some of our websites fall into this where like, we don't even have a timeline or roadmap. Like you have all that just lives in this sort of like real time social media lore. And I do think that like the real winners in this space will end up sort of to your point, remembering the lessons of the last 10 or 15 years of the internet and ensuring that there is a clean kind of like migration path, right? And that's a marketing journey of like, hey, how do I find a user that knows how to use the internet, knows how to use Google or a search engine or something, and then migrates onto this sort of Web3 platform in a more natural way, where today I'll admit it's very, very disjointed for our stuff, and well as like a lot of the projects, because you're sort of connecting this very decentralized thing, but it to an extent goes a little bit against this sort of permissionless and decentralized way. It's like, why would I build a centralized website for something that's decentralized? But I do think to like grow the audience and education, we're gonna have to bridge that and get to this Web 2.5 thing before we just jump into like, this new brave world of like everything being disconnected and you're sort of just supposed to
Yeah.
know how to go
I mean,
use it.
it's a little ironic that so many Web3 projects and organizations are relying on a centralized company like, say, Medium.com for their blog or uh, their riffing on like in kind of article format, and they're relying on Discord, which is a company, right? So they got an app, and they could have relied on Signal or Telegram. They could have had built a community on Telegram instead of on Discord. It's not easy for somebody who's not a Discord user to suddenly switch everything they've known about how to communicate on apps like WhatsApp and Telegram to now install Discord and set up an account there, and that's the only way that you can participate in the community for that particular project. It just doesn't seem that user centric. It's just kind of, that's what everybody else does. That's what all the other Web3 projects do. And so we're going to just use medium.com for our blog as well. We're going to use Discord for our community. And if the users are not clued into this, then that's just their problem. But of course, it has repercussions like search engine optimization issues. If you're uh, relegating your control over your blog onto a platform like medium.com. Now it's no longer part of your website. And it's not ideal in terms of leveraging the link equity, the domain authority that your website has to put it on medium.com, a chunk of your site. So anyways, just I'm just complaining, I guess.
No, it's super valid, and I think you're right. Like there is this sort of like weird bootstrapping thing of like how do you bootstrap a Web3 community from zero without leveraging the old stuff or having an audience on the old stuff. And I think some of the ones that have done a great job is like, like this, our friends Luca at Pudgy Penguins, they have like a huge Instagram account, a huge Giphy account. So they've built like really big social accounts. They have a, $10 million merch business selling their toys on Amazon, but then have, NFTs, right? And so like they've really done a good job of like deeply integrating and finding people where they are today, like where they buy toys today, it's Amazon. Where do they do cool gifts and little cute images? It's on Instagram, right? And they've built big audiences there, built things on Twitter, and then moved that back into an NFT, and a more Web3 decentralized thing. And so I think they've done a good job with it, but I think even them, and you talk about websites, they've got a lot of iframes and a lot of different things that aren't going to be like the most natural to a search engine, partly because as you're building fast and using lots of vendors, that ends up happening. And our stuff is similar with DeGods and Utes. So we have websites that instantly become legacy after 6 months because the technology is moving so fast. We rebuild something else, and it's a big challenge. And one that honestly, like our company Dust Labs is looking to build a lot, is like, hey, how do we build stuff that is more designed to be that bridge between Web 2 and Web 3. So if you're a brand coming to Web 3, how can you build something that's delightful and try to get some of those mistakes, avoided on your first pass? I think you mentioned mistakes now on the website side. I think one of the ones that I see brands make consistently and really had a bad run of this in 2021 was every brand was like, I'm just going to go mint something on the blockchain. I'm going to make an NFT. I'm going to just, and that stuff's very hard to get rid of, right? It's not like a website, or if you put up a bad website, you can delete your web page and change it later. But if you create a token or you create an NFT and you put that on the blockchain, like it's kind of permanent, right? And it's kind of hard to delete it. And so I think, having proper strategy and thinking through what you're doing, just like you would honestly, if you were designing a great website, you'd want to think through your, link plan, your strategy plan up front. It's even more important in Web3 because of the permanentness of it. And, you as the creator many times don't have full permission to our permissionless idea to be able to actually remove it because it's now on the blockchain and it's kind of going to be there forever. And so just something to think about as people are looking at, sort of leveraging these new technologies to think before you act.
Yeah. Are you still bullish about NFTs and that technology?
We are, and I think the many companies or many projects in the space have said like, hey, we're going to go build gaming, we're going to go build physicals, we're going to go build movies or anime or IP use, and for us, we're to a fault deeply interested in like digital collectibles and NFTs as a thing. And our view is that if you think back when I was growing up, like baseball cards and collecting things, and you go through shops in Japan and there's all these figurines, and like collectibles have been a thing for a long time. And if you think of the audience, our kids are growing up with devices like literally at age 1 or 2, they got an iPad and mom and dad are putting them in front of it. And they learn to use devices and they're like digitally native essentially from birth. And for them, we deeply believe as that audience grows, the kind of internet native, device native audience, they're going to look for more and more things to do to collect digitally. And we've seen this in Web 2 to an extent with Roblox and CSGO skins and Fortnite skins. Like there is like large digital things today where what people don't realize is if I buy something in CSGO, I generally have to like sell my account, right? Or if I buy stuff in Fortnite, I have to sell my account. Like I can't resell things that I've bought in Fortnite. And I think we view there's going to be a really rapid shift at some point when a lot of these sort of traditional sort of virtual goods that have been sold over the last 5 to 10 years, people are gonna want like real ownership of those. Like I actually want to own that. I want to be able to trade it. I want to be able to sell it. And so why NFTs a lot of times in sort of media or even crypto and mainstream media gets a bad rap for, oh, it's too early, it's a scam. There's all these like negative things because that sort of sells better press. We believe that there's tons of virtual goods that are happening in gaming and happening in like life today where people are collecting things virtually, and that is going to move to a digital collectible, and NFTs is going to be, one part of the technology to make that happen. And our view and sort of our company ethos is like we want to build like luxury digital collectibles, like really expensive ones. And today that manifests with this profile pic PFP projects where it's like, I'm a picture, in our case it's a DeGod, and it's your representation online or your avatar online. And we believe, as just like if you look at in the luxury business around handbags or something like that, people value those because they're luxury and because they're built by a company that understands what luxury is about. And our view is that we think is the long game. Like, 5-10 years from now, there are going to be luxury digital collectibles, and we're deeply interested in figuring out what that looks like. There's going to be a lot of low cost ones. We think that one will be easier to figure out, just like there's lots of ways to figure out what low cost. I can go to a swap meet or a discount shop and find lots of low cost clothing or lots of low cost bags or things like that. But those luxury ones take years to craft that brand and really understand what that audience wants and the experience, right? Walking into a Louis Vuitton store is an experience no matter where you go in the world. And they've spent an enormous amount of time to get that right. And so our view is like understanding that audience is where we're putting most of our attention. And we believe that digital collectibles will be a space and it will grow, and NFTs will be part of that. But it's going to take a while for that transition to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember hearing a speaker at, I don't think it was Permissionless, I think it was Decentral Miami, talking about how NFTs will be used as a place to store, a virtual place to store things like all your medical records, your driver's license, your birth certificate, marriage license, all these sorts of important digital documents that if you lost it in a physical form, you're kind of screwed. You have to go to the DMV and get a new one. You have to go to, if you lose your passport, it's a big deal to go and replace that. And you would get assigned an NFT upon birth that, all right, here's your birth certificate, here's all your medical records from your birth, and here's the NFT that stores it.
Yeah.
What do you think about
that? I think it's coming, and I think the technology arguably supports that today, right? If you just said, hey, I'm going to go implement this, obviously there's a ton of regulation to sort of make that possible. And the US is pretty far behind in sort of supporting and regulating this or defining what the gray area is, what's going to be allowed. I think countries like Asia, where I've spent, the last 5 weeks, I've been in Bangkok, Tokyo, Singapore, and Seoul, Korea, all much farther ahead in terms of regulation. Dubai is another country that's much farther ahead in regulation in terms of understanding what's possible, what's legal. There's Busan, which is actually a city that's like the blockchain city in Korea, where they're like doing all kinds of very deeply native things with the city government. Japan has a couple trials out where they're digitizing like museum passes and things like that, that are starting to get into this like governments getting familiar with like, hey, how do you use this technology to, quite frankly, reduce their costs, simplify things, to your point, make it more permanent. So if you do lose something, it's like digitally able to look it up and prove that it's me or prove that I own it. I think ticketing is one that people have talked about for a while. I think in the US it's tough because like Ticketmaster and Live Nation sort of own the venues, they own the artists and the presentation. And so they have a little bit of a monopoly to make that as possible. But we're seeing, ticketing, again, lower stakes, right? A concert ticket, lower stakes than birth certificate or driver's license in terms of that technology fleshing itself out. But definitely think that the infrastructure around that will support it. And it's just going to be time for, government and corporations that kind of hold those keys today to decide when they're comfortable sort of like making that transition.
I know we're out of time, so I just want to wrap with one last quick question, and that is, what would be a favorite book or audiobook that you would recommend for our listener that would help them to see or kind of glimpse into the future of what's coming and how vastly different 5, 10, 20 years from now is going to be versus what we're seeing and experiencing today. And I'll go first and just offer either Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash or his The Diamond Age as a great kind of novel of what's likely to come down the pike in the very near future. So now I'm curious to hear what your recommendation is.
Yeah, no, I would go with so Bobby Hundreds wrote a book with a cool title. It's like NFTs are a scam, and then it's like NFTs are the future, and it just talks about sort of the early years. And I think Bobby Hundreds is a fashion brand. They have some really cool clothing. It's just and he was really early into NFTs and sort of like being a proponent of it. And I think it walks through an interesting view of like you know, NFTs, like any early technology, gets abused in good and bad ways. And I think, but over time, I think some of the formative things of like what's valuable about ownership and what's valuable about being able to trade things, I think over time people will start to see that there's a lot of intrinsic sort of goodness about that, and it's going to be something that we're going to see increase in use over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, we'll include all this in the show notes, all the books and tools, projects, and everything that were discussed in this episode. So, listener, please go check them out. And of course, if our listener or viewer wants to learn more from you, Kevin, where can they follow you and learn from you, and maybe even work with you if they have a project they want to build out with your services company, Dust Labs?
Yeah, so dustlabs.com, and then follow me on Twitter, Kevin DeGods, and then and then our two NFT projects are DeGods.com and Utes.com, Utes with 2 zeros.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, listener. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.